Okay, great. Thank you, Erin. Welcome everyone to this month's meeting of the MOU committee. I'll read the notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire, MPO staff at McGuire at ctps.org, or telephone number 857-702-3681, or via the chat box. The guidelines: number one, all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Number two, please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Number three, after roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. Number four, to participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. Number five, if you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And with that, introductions.
Inner Core Committee.
Tom Bent, City of Somerville, represent Mayor Ballantyne.
MBTA Advisory Board. Not seeing Brian. Metro West Regional Collaborative. Also do not see Dennis. MassDOT Seat 1.
Derek Cravat here from MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning.
MassDOT Seat 2.
John Romano, MassDOT Highway.
MAPC. I'm not sure if Eric is able to unmute. We'll return. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Excuse me, Leonard Viggs Advisory Council here.
Thank you. City of Boston.
Jen Rowe representing the City of Boston and Mayor Shalhoub.
Town of Brookline.
Mike Sandman, Town of Brookline.
And then returning to MAPC. Okay, that is the roll, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. We'll go on to number two, public comments. If there are no public comments, if one comes up during our meeting, we will raise your hand and we'll try to accommodate you.
I see Jim has his hand up. So Nate.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, the MWRTA would like to thank the ad hoc MOU subcommittee and CTPS staff for the time and consideration of the last several months, and for some of you, the last several years. We look forward to being an active and engaged member alongside of you all in the years to come, and we hope that our membership starting this fall will benefit the entire region, such that your work here will be looked back upon as a really important step forward for the MPO as a whole. We know that your work as a subcommittee is ongoing with many other topics to tackle, but we just wanted to make sure we expressed thank you for placing this as one of the top items on your list and for finding a solution that was so mutually agreeable for all parties.
Okay, Jim, thank you. Glad to have you aboard soon. David, I saw an agenda slide come up. Did you want me to go through that? Okay, today's agenda, number one is advisory council role. We have the draft language. Number two would be looking ahead and work planning. And number three would be next meetings. Okay, so we move on to number 5, it looks like. We need a vote for to approve the minutes of the February 7th meeting. I have a motion. Len?
I'll motion to approve.
Thank you, Len. Derek?
I will second that motion.
All right. That motion's been approved. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Thank you. Tom Ben?
Yes.
Derek Cravat?
Derek Cravat, yes.
John Romano?
John Romano, yes.
Len Diggins?
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe?
Jen Rowe, yes.
Mike Sandman?
Mike Sandman, yes.
All right, thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, going to move to item number 6. The Regional Transportation Advisory Council draft language. Stella Jordan, MPO staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, everyone. Great to be back today talking with you all about the advisory council role. So at the last committee meeting, I shared some updates on what the advisory council has been discussing regarding the MOU update process. Since then, we've actually drafted some updated language to replace the current language about the advisory council in the MOU. So that draft language is posted to today's meeting calendar. And before we kind of dig into the content of that language, I want to quickly provide some refreshers on sort of what went into it and what the discussions have been around that language so far. So quickly on parameters for the advisory council language update. Again, these were based on what the original ad hoc MOU update committee had put together in their memo recommending full MOU updates. This was specifically regarding the role of the advisory council and again, sort of drawn firm recommendations from the certification review as well. So the key points there for those recommendations were to clarify the role and mission of the advisory council in the MOU, to more clearly outline the relationship between the advisory council and the MPO board, MPO staff, and the MPO sort of engagement program activities, clearly define goals for the advisory council, and then sort of keep the update at a higher level. So not really dig into specific logistics about how the advisory council functions. And if we could go on to the next slide. A quick refresher as well. I know we already went through this at the last meeting, but just to give a little refresh on the feedback from the March advisory council meeting discussion, where we sort of initiated the conversation about the MOU language update. We talked about some examples from peer MPOs advisory councils and sort of heard about some common challenges and some goals that other advisory councils had that really resonated. And then we talked sort of at a higher level about priorities and goals for this advisory council. Key themes from that discussion were membership on the advisory council, the importance of education as part of the advisory council's work, the importance of the board seat on the MPO board for the advisory council chair, and the advisory council relationship with staff. So sort of as playing like an advisory or even almost focus group style role in providing feedback on the development of MPO programs and projects, as well as during decision-making periods. And we talked about, ensuring that staff really are proactively creating these connections with the advisory council as well. So I used all of this feedback and drew from the peer research on other MPOs advisory councils and previously discussed parameters for this update to draft some language that I think sort of covers all of the areas that we've talked about here and really hits these key themes and recommendations. And you'll find that posted to today's meeting calendar again. We could go to the next slide, please. I'm actually going to, if I could, share my screen real quick for sort of a different visualization of what this language looks like. This is something that I shared with the advisory council as well during our last discussion of this language. It's the same written content as what's posted to the calendar, but here I've added some highlights so that we can sort of break down like where these specific elements in this update are coming from. So just sort of a different way of visualizing it. So here the green highlights in this language is content that corresponds to the update parameters. So in the first paragraph here, this language describes the advisory council's role and mission, which were key areas that we needed to cover in the update. And then defining goals was another thing that was in the parameters, but I also highlighted these according to how they relate to the feedback that the advisory council provided during our last conversation at the March meeting. So advisory council feedback is indicated by the blue highlight. And then membership, education and engagement, the relationship to staff, again, those were all key themes that the advisory council discussed and highlighted at their last meeting. So there's also highlights there. And then in addition, a longer description of the relationship with staff and how staff creates connections to the work that the advisory council can impact in the paragraph below those goals. And then the first part of that paragraph, that final paragraph there, is sort of a more functional description of the relationship with staff, which I consider to be more of a parameter within the update. Well, the second part really expands on that and outlines some key elements that that relationship really supports and furthers, which I considered to be more tied to what the advisory council had discussed. And then finally, the pink highlight indicates that some areas where, sort of after considering all of these different elements, the update parameters, the existing MOU language, peer research we've done, and our discussions with the advisory council, that is content that we as staff really wanted to elevate as elements that we thought could address and really advance public engagement program priorities, as well as advisory council priorities, and that will sort of help frame and guide staff's continued support for and collaboration with the advisory council. So again, this is just sort of a different way to look at the elements of this update. I'm happy to answer any questions about this, and we can certainly come back to this, but I will stop my share, and Erin, if you could go back to the main deck for the last bit here. Thank you. So yeah, then I just briefly wanted to mention, this looks familiar to Len, I'm sure, because I gave sort of the same overview at the last advisory council meeting, and just wanting to highlight that at that April advisory council meeting, when we discussed this language, members seemed to respond pretty positively overall to the proposed language. There was some discussion around the advisory role of the advisory council, really in providing guidance and advice on MPO work, and the importance of us highlighting that function in the MOU update. I haven't made further changes to the language to that effect yet. The chair and I thought that was fairly well addressed in the current draft, but certainly open to perspectives from this group as well. And there, I just want to sort of open it up to this group and see if y'all have other changes suggested. You think anything's missing from this update, we can certainly go back and make further modifications, you know, discuss with the advisory council further as needed, but really looking forward to just hearing your perspectives as well.
Okay, Stella, thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I have one question.
Okay, Derek?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it might just be for my own edification, but is there like does the advisory council have members? Like, it's a membership based, like, and who are the members, if so? And I guess I'm just curious about that piece of if there should be anything. Like, I think this does a good job of sort of describing the the sort of what and why of the advisory council. I'm just kind of curious if there's like a who aspect to it, and if there should be anything fleshed out there.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I don't think the language in the current MOU gets super prescriptive about membership. It talks about that the advisory council has membership from various types of stakeholders, essentially. Right now, functionally, the membership is more described in the advisory council's bylaws, and that's really around like who can become a member and how, and what you need to do to remain a member. I don't believe staff have published like a public membership list in a bit, but we can certainly do that right now. It's comprised of sort of a mix of stakeholder types, advocacy organizations, municipalities that are not represented on the board, professional organizations. I'm open to adding that into the MOU language, but I think it is also covered in the bylaws as well.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it seems to be covered in the equity section. It's comprising those different stakeholder types. That makes sense. Cool. Okay. Yeah, just trying to chew on it a little bit. It seems like there's different forums for different types of organizations sometimes, and it's tough to compare with other MPOs, at least in Massachusetts, because their like advisory groups are all mostly municipal officials, but I feel like a lot of that in the Boston region happens at sub-regional meetings and things like that. So sort of its own animal, but thanks for the clarification there. Appreciate it.
Anybody else? Questions or comments? Jen
has.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry if there's some background noise. I'm in transit. I just wanted to say I appreciate the language. I think it all sounds very thoughtful. Really like the kind of emphasis on education. I think it's always struck me that the MPO being kind of at the I don't know, like a coordinating body between a lot of different stakeholders in transportation, kind of is very well positioned to help the public and organizations that might not be as like in tune to the complications of the types landscape that we work in, kind of understand and navigate it. And so I like thinking of the advisory council as a part of that. So the direction.
Thank you, Jen. Anybody, any other comments? I was just going to, it's funny, I was just going to ask Len, so I saw his hand go up. I wanted to see if Len's comments on this.
Sure, thank you. You know, sorry on my part about the background sound here. It's a little active because it's a little bit after the core lunch hour. So, I mean, I'm happy with this too, especially the educational aspect of it. But the outcome is no surprise. You know, and I just think that we need to work on the end of it some more. I mean, there's a one sentence in. I think we need to flesh that out. You know, so we can work on that. I think in the next advisory council meeting. You know, so I mean, I don't know if there's much more to be said. You know, but we'll I think maybe add more than have a little another sentence or two to just wrap it up a little more. You know, unless people, yeah, that's all I'll say at this point. That's all. Yeah, nothing else.
Thanks, Len. Anyone else? All right, seeing none. So Stella, I think, do you have enough to take your next steps?
Yeah, thank you all. Definitely appreciate the input. Feel free to reach out to me before the next advisory council meeting if you're interested in sharing any additional thoughts. But yeah, as Len said, we can continue to discuss there.
I did put my hand. I put my hand back up. You know, so
okay.
So I'm I'm wondering to what extent maybe we should be contact our Fed reps to see how they feel about this, because I mean one of their critiques was that maybe our mission wasn't defined enough. And I guess I'd be curious to see how they feel about this before we got to board meeting. Curious as how you feel about that, Tom as chair and Stella as our staff rep. Thank you.
Len, it's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. Stella, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know that specifically, like, some of the recommendations that came out of the past certification review about the advisory council, we could sort of go back to those as maybe a starting point for running new language by our federal partners. I also don't want to throw anyone into the spotlight, but curious if other folks on the staff side have any thoughts about that. I'm not sure if that's something that we've been doing for other update modules or not.
Yeah, I was going to ask Tegan if she had any thoughts on that, because I don't know if we've normally done that in the past.
Hi, everyone. I've been sort of voice restricted over the last week because I've had some kind of something laryngitis. Could you repeat the question and I will try to respond very succinctly. Dave might answer for me just to save me.
It was Leonard brought up the thought of passing this by the feds to see if it answers or if it's adequate to what they were that they had brought up in the certification review.
Let me let Dave answer first and I can add.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If my audio is coming through, if I could just
get
a thumbs up. Yes, so I mean, in terms of modules of other language, as you know, we have not been running, passing language through to our federal partners, but if it is deemed that just in terms of vetting the language that it is satisfactory vis-a-vis the review, and perhaps kind of sharing through a draft. I'm just also gauging to see if Tegan is head nodding or not, but that might be worth just confirming as this Len positioned. So just from a risk and kind of a readiness standpoint. So yeah, something that staff could do and run by them and also update the committee accordingly.
Then I'll just add that the recommendation in this regard and in many regards is actually relatively open in the sense of the recommendation was more around better defining. And so except for, we know the RTA recommendation came back several times, but most of the other ones are a little bit more open for, I think, this group's interpretation, but we can try to circle around and resolve that. Sorry. Thanks for my other staff for jumping in.
Annette?
Yeah, so we do, for all of the recommendations in the action plan, we do provide updates to our federal partners every quarter. And so they do get a summary of what we've been working on. I think in terms of the advisory council language, I don't think that's a strict federal requirement. So I'm thinking they probably are very flexible in what we provide.
Okay, thank you. Len.
The whole line of inquiry was worth it just for Annette's response there, because it wasn't really apparent to me to which extent advisory councils are a requirement for NPOs, and apparently we aren't. So that would be relax perhaps the requirement. One part of the reason I asked is that I thought maybe I had heard or read that they were concerned that we hadn't produced our 3DC documents, as we had said we would, and indeed we had. They just weren't posted on the web, and so I was kind of wondering if that might be something they would be looking for, as part of the MOU. I think that is in our bylaws, but there's part of me too that kind of wants to relax that commitment. I mean, I'm thinking about it. I mean, I personally like it. I mean, I just don't know to what extent all the group is on board with it, at least in a practical way. And I guess we could always invite the vets to an advisory council meeting where we're talking about this, but I didn't want to do something like that without running it by at least the staff being in and by this committee. And and it's more in the spirit of just being open to critique, and figuring out what our federal partners think would make the advisory council better, whether or not it's a requirement. I have some food for thought. I mean, certainly won't do anything without. I won't push for anything without having more of a conversation with folks. So with that, thank you.
Right, thanks, Len. Yeah, I think with what Annette said too about how they share the information as they're moving through these things. That and it seemed like to me too that the feds were more wanting us to make sure that we're engaging with the advisory council to get their input and their perspective as to what their roles should be. So I think it wasn't like with the RTAs where there was a more of a directive. This is what we want you to do. So I think we're probably good with that. Anybody else on that? Okay, seeing none, we could move on to item 7, I believe. Unless you need something else, Stella.
No, thank you all.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Item 7, looking ahead, work planning. David?
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, again, just for gathering on this Friday. I'll swiftly walk us through our work plan and where we are with our modules. And so as we talked about just now, in terms of bringing anything back, I guess Len and others can deliberate a bit more on the next steps. If we do want to have a committee chair report, kind of present an interim update, but it may make more sense to bring that in a more fleshed out form when the draft is prepared. And so any of these items that we see on this slide is TBD. Len, once the advisory council firms up all of what was presented today here at the committee and previously at the advisory council, once the language is grounded, then subsequently we can take it and decide which MPO board meeting to take it to. Other than that, the agency collaboration module, staff are beginning to talk with OTP and brainstorming ideas to see how we can more closely align practices around readiness update, around what is currently in the MOU operations plan. And so those conversations have just kind of begun last week. So we'll keep the committee abreast of any progress that is made, very early stages. And then subsequently, probably go meet with other agencies around capital investment plan reporting and timelines that reflecting on the recent experiences that we've had as well. So that's what we have for the next month or so. Then if we go to the next slide, just a spot check on where we are. And so obviously we've made good headway, as Jim had highlighted, around RTA roles at the board meeting, fiduciary agreement. That one was presented on, I think, the previous committee meeting. Advisory council role we talked about today, and agency collaboration description update is underway. So we're making good headway towards the fall. A public engagement, or rather public notification had gone out in April, signaling that we'll have a chance for public comment, but we'll need to have a consolidated MOU update draft in order for that to make its way out and for folks to meaningfully comment on any changes. So that is our status and progress update for this cycle.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
So move on to item number 8. Does any members have any items they'd like to bring forward? Len.
Well, I had a question actually about the looking ahead work plan. And
Okay.
and maybe I spaced out on this. I mean, what does board education consist of? I mean, and why is it going to take as long as it does? Because I'm thinking that maybe, if it doesn't take as long, we can pull the public comment period ahead a little bit, and have this thing wrapped up in time to make sure that we are done before the annual meeting. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Yeah, we had started that discussion much earlier in terms of modules, and so that was the part around different formats for education. And I think where the committee had landed was in periodic newsletters or updates to share materials or conferences that are pertinent to board education, as well as thinking about what format and what who would be able to attend conferences like AMPO for the upcoming fiscal. And I think that still needs to be decided, but I think 3 meetings ago, we spoke about board education and did a bit of research in terms of others who, how others have used online as well as kind of in-person training to educate board members. I'll pass it back to the chair because I see there are other hands as well.
Thanks, Dave. Tegan?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think that at this point, it's not the board education that's going to be the kind of the determining factor as to when public comment will be able to start. And so we should actually refine and update this for the next meeting that we have with you, because in fact, the fiduciary agent agreement process will likely take a bit longer, and the agency collaboration description, while we are starting early, still may take this sort of full extent of time. So as we're updating on those various elements, while some of these have shortened and we've been done earlier, I'd like to revisit those 2 items in particular to see how long we think they'll take. And yes, if we can move up the public comment, we should do that. But those are, I think, more of the dependencies than the board education element of this, as we initially sort of laid out in this timeline.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then there's August, right? Because we're going to be meeting every week in August, right? No, actually the opposite. So I was wondering if maybe that was factoring in, to the timeline. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Dan.
Yeah. Community outreach would be more beneficial here a little bit. We tend to be too ivory towered, and we're not getting enough input from the community on what their needs are. Here in Charlestown, which is where I'm an advocate for, we're sort of isolated from the core of the city, and being the smallest element of the city, we tend to be overruled, I guess, or not seen very effectively. So outreach / design, pre-design input would be beneficial so that we don't get lost in the paperwork.
All right, Dan, could you state your full name for the record also? And what
Dan Jaffe. I'm a community advocate for transportation in the community of Charlestown.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Let's see, any other member items? Okay, seeing none. I'd like to thank everyone. I know it's a Friday afternoon, so we tried to make this one short and sweet. Is there, I would need a motion to, no, just a motion to adjourn, I think. And Jen?
I'll motion to adjourn.
And I need a second.
Ligon seconds.
And Len second. All right, all in, we don't need roll call for that, right? Nope. All in favor? Say aye.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.